Eleanor of Aquitaine, Aquitaine. Aquitaine is the name of the southwestern province of France, and it is often also called Poitou, neighboring county, and there are lots of other names for it too. On the screen, Eleanor, one image of her, and two of the good books. Everybody's going to ask about books. What can I read? What can I read? There are two great ones out right now. One is old and one is new. And the old one is the Amy Kelly book that you see on your screen. It's been around about 50 years. Amy Kelly was a great researcher who went to France, spent a lot of time in the archives, and this was 50, 60 years ago, and really mastered the documents on Eleanor. Not a lot new has been discovered, so she did a very good job. And she's written a great book. It's in print, and you can certainly get it if you want. Then, the newer book is the Alison Ware book. As you all know, Alison Ware has been a master of Tudor Stuart history for decades. She has great biographies of all the Tudor Stuart women, great biography of Elizabeth, one of the best. Then she's written a very good biography of Eleanor. So if you'd like a newer biography, and if you like Alison Ware, you can certainly get that one. If you would like a novel about Eleanor of Aquitaine, you can get it. It's good, and it's by Alison Ware. It's called The Captive Queen, and the title, of course, is highlighting the period of Eleanor's life when she is a captive queen. So if you like a novel, if you like fiction, you can also get that. And, of course, the first question you're all going to ask is, well, why a whole night on Eleanor? This is her effigy on the tomb where she's buried in Fontevraud Abbey in France. Eleanor of Aquitaine, first of all, had a very long life. She lived 82 years, and in the 12th century, that was a long life. That's pretty good even now, isn't it? 82 isn't terrible. But she had a long life, number one. Number two, she was born into one of the great families of Europe, and she inherited from her father the Duchy of Aquitaine, meaning she was the title holder of one of the greatest pieces of real estate in all of Europe. And so it was inevitable, it was predictable. Everybody knew that she would be marrying somebody important, maybe a king, and she did. So she is the Queen of France for a considerable period of time. And then she is the Queen of England for a considerable period of time. So she is a queen twice of two great countries, and then the queen mother of a number of other kings and queens, and the queen grandmother of a whole other generation of kings and queens. So essentially, more people are connected to Eleanor in the royalty of the 12th century than anybody else. And so not only is her story a great story, and her person, and the life that she lived, but also she's very important. Now, we're looking back at the Dark Ages that we just talked about last week. We're looking back at the period 500 to 1000. And so as we start tonight with the story of Eleanor, as you see on the screen, is 1122. So we're 100 years into the early Middle Ages. But we want to go back, and we want to just say a few things about Europe at 1000, because we just spent last week talking about a 500-year period, 500 to 1000. And so tonight, let's just go back and fill in that period before Eleanor's story begins. So first of all, let's put up some maps. And you saw them last week, so you can see them again and remember the main issues, because what we did was talk about 500 to 1000. We talked about those 500 years and what happened in European history. And now tonight, we're going to pinpoint the year 1000. We're very interested in the year 1000 tonight, because we've just looked back at the 500 years from 500 to 1000, and now something big happens around 1000. And so we're entering a new world. Things are changing. Everything's different. And Eleanor is the best possible person that we could pick for this week, this 13th week of our story. So take a look again at the map of the invaders. And this alerts you to the fact that about around the year 500, all of Europe is a swirl with huge moving populations. When you look at this map and you see all those markers, that means hundreds of thousands of people. That doesn't mean, 25 people coming down the street. This is hundreds of thousands in all of these groups that are moving. So whether it's the Franks or the Angles or the Saxons or the Goths, these are the movements of hundreds of thousands of people. And what you see on the map is that there's a huge movement into the middle of Europe and through Europe. So the various Gothic peoples, take them, the red line up at the top. They're coming from way up in the Scandinavia, up in Sweden, and then they move south and east, and they end up very close to Constantinople. Then they move again. They move west. They move through Europe. They move into Italy, back out again along the French coast and into Spain. And the Western Goths, called the Visigoths, they settle down in Spain. And then there are other Goths. The Vandals are really another branch off of the Goths, and they end up going all the way to North Africa. And then you have other groups, the Angles and the Saxons, moving through. Now, what's causing all this movement? That's the first thing that you're going to wonder about. Well, here it is. The Huns. The Huns were wilder than all the other people and coming from further east, and therefore they were pushing up against all those other groups of people. You see the date on the map, about 450. And so that moment when the Hunnic Empire moves in from way far in the east and comes in and pushes in, they're pushing the Goths and pushing the Angles and the Saxons and the Franks. All of those people are being pushed out of the center of Europe and being caused to move and look for new places to go. So if you want to know what provokes all this movement at about the year 450, it's the Huns. It's the arrival of the Huns in Europe, and everything is disrupted, most importantly, the Roman Empire. And so between 500 and 600, the Roman Empire disappears, the western part of it. The east is still there, Byzantium, Constantinople, the red on the map you're looking at. But the west, it's gone. And Italy collapses into multiple states. And so from 600 to 700, all of Europe is repositioning, and new states are being founded. So there's a new state in France based in Tours. There's a new state in Spain based at Toledo. There's a new state in Italy based on Milan and Pavia. And this is going on all over Europe. New non-Roman, after the fall of Rome, new non-Roman states, Gothic origins, but then in the next years they'll convert to Christianity. Now, all of this is interrupted all over again by a whole new movement, which you see up on the screen now as the spread of Islam. And Islam begins to move out of Arabia at about 650, and then it moves both east and west, out of Arabia north, east, and west. It goes into the east all the way, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and then it goes west all the way through North Africa and across to Gibraltar and into Spain. So by the early 700s, the whole southern side of the Mediterranean is in control of an Islamic empire and Spain. And you can see on this map, the pressure goes way through the Iberian Peninsula and way through Spain and past the Pyrenees and into the south of France, into the southwest corner of France. And keep that in mind tonight as we talk about Eleanor, because that's her territory, that southwest corner of France. And so therefore, this is very, very important in helping to explain what is unusual about southwest France, what is unusual about the world of Eleanor. With the push into Europe of Islam, including complete conquest of, almost 100% conquest of Spain, and the push past the Pyrenees into the southwest corner, this penetration into Europe provokes a response. And in Europe, the people who organize the response and therefore propel themselves into a leadership position of Europe in the 700s are the Franks. And the Franks have their capital in Tours, but they stretch over into Germany too, in the Rhineland. And by 800, their leader is named Charlemagne. And so the leadership of the Franks arrives and is completed and appears and is fulfilled in the 700s. What is it that leads the Frankish power in European history? What is it that drives their leadership? Well, it's the confrontation with the Islamic armies. It is the Frankish army and the general who heads up that army, Charles Martel. Martel means hammer, so he had been given the name Charles the Hammer. So it is Charles Martel and Frankish armies that go southwest from the Tour, Loire Valley, go down to southwest and confront the Islamic army at the Battle of Poitiers, which is fought in 732. And 732 is one of the most important battles in all of history, because at that moment, the Islamic armies coming from Spain come past the Pyrenees, penetrate the southwest corner of France, and at that moment, Charles Martel leads his armies and stops them. So it's one of the great confrontations between methods and fighting and the way of Islamic armies and methods and fighting and equipment and all the rest of it from the Frankish European army. The Europeans win. The Franks win. Charles Martel and the Frankish nation wins, and this puts them at the head of Christendom. It puts them as the leaders of Christendom, moves their family and moves the Frankish nation and moves the whole Frankish state to a central position. And by 800, everybody acknowledges, everybody knows by 800 that the Franks, in the person of Charles the Big, what's his name? Charlemagne. Charles the Big is the big Frank by 800. Charles is the biggest of the big Franks by 800. His father was Pepin the Short. So poor Pepin had to go around all the time and have everybody meet his son and say, oh my goodness, your son Charles is big. And so eventually they called Charles the Big, and Papa they called him Pepin the Short. So poor Pepin had to go around the whole world for the rest of his life being Pepin the Short. And by 800, Charles is the very, very, very big Charles, because he is the most important political leader in all of Europe. And you can see on the map, the Frankish state essentially has gobbled up much of Europe, Belgium, across the river into Germany, including Saxony, Bavaria, down into the parts of the Spanish coast, and much of Italy, right down to Rome. So this, at 800, this is the greatest state in Europe in the year 800.